The term gamism has meant a few different things over the years. It's evolved over time. But for the sake of this discussion, gamism is when the primary way that the players interact with the game is through its mechanics. The mechanics are the primary way the players interact with the game. In some RPGs, mechanics are created to reward or restrict like the decision-making process that in other games are left to the player's whim or GM fiat. The question is, can this design philosophy go too far? Can it get to the point where it is too restrictive? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. Hi, my name is Matt. Welcome to the Tumalam. Let's do a thought experiment. Imagine a game that is kept intentionally, completely abstract. It has no thematic content whatsoever. It has abstract objects which have abstract properties, and those abstract properties only reference other objects and properties within the game. The win condition is to deplete the other player's victory resource, abstract victory resource, and the rules are complete and very robust, and so much so that they could be run by an algorithm. All right, let's say that someone plays this game. Player 1 uses object 1 or property A on object A. Maybe they roll some dice, and it ends up depleting victory resource A on object B. And then player 2 uses property A on object B to do the same thing, and it reduces property B on object A to 0, and they win the game. All right, I guess the question is, has roleplay occurred yet? So we've deliberately not assigned any roles to anything. So I would say that that's impossible. You couldn't even really say that they were playing the role of players because they're not playing at being players. They literally are the players of the game. So no roles, no roleplay. Let's go deeper. Let's say an observer, who happens to be the game designer, let's say, has information about the thematic content of the objects of this game now. So we've added thematic content. They know that object A is the drifter, and property A is his revolver, and resource A is his health, and resource B is his sanity, and object B is Lovecraftian horror of some kind, right? So completely unbeknownst to the players, and without their consent, he's assigned roles and thematic content to the abstract objects of the game, and he watches as the players play out a simulation of a drifter fighting a Migo or whatever. At the end, he also has a sequence of events that he could use to tell a story. That could be a story. As far as producing an outcome goes, they have simulated something, they have produced a simulated result, and they have produced a story, so they've engaged in collaborative storytelling. They didn't experience the telling or the simulating, but as a product produced, they succeeded. Now, nothing in the players' brains has changed whatsoever from level 1 of our experiment when they were definitely absolutely not role-playing. But now that there's thematic information, there are roles assigned to the mechanics of the game. Are they role-playing? If this level of the experiment does constitute role-playing, then you could say that literally anything you ever do is role-playing, so long as there is someone to assign roles to what you're doing. If I spied on you making breakfast this morning and I assigned roles to the spoon of helicopter and a role of the milk to the ocean and role of cornflakes to drowning sailors, then I could watch you play out a simulation or tell a story of a helicopter pilot rescuing drowning sailors from the ocean, right? Literally anything that anyone ever does is now role-playing. It would make that definition completely worthless. Maybe we could differentiate it by saying that you fulfilled a role, but you weren't playing a role because you weren't playing at anything. You were just eating breakfast. All right, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. Right, now the GM guy, the game designer guy is in the room, and he says, while you play the game, I will tell you a story. So the players play the game mechanically, optimally, exactly as they were doing it in levels 1 and 2. And as they do, the GM tells a story that is based on what they're doing. They just don't know that there's a correlation. Right, now the players are aware of the thematic content of the game. It just has absolutely no effect on their decision-making process. Nothing is going on in the brains of the players that is any different from the previous levels, even level 1, where it was completely abstract with absolutely 0 roles assigned to anything. Are they role-playing? Okay, at this level, the GM tells the players they are acting out a simulation. They have roles, but he doesn't tell them what they are. He just says, there is thematic content, but at the end, I will tell you a story of the thing that you have ended up simulating. Again, the player plays optimally. There is no effect on the decision-making process of the players at all by the thematic content in this situation. Roleplay? All right, level 5. The GM tells them the thematic content of the roles they're playing. He says, you're a drifter and you're fighting a Lovecraftian horror. And they say, awesome. And they play mechanically, optimally, just like they have been at every layer of this experiment. But because they're good gamists, they don't let the thematic content affect their decision-making at all. Now, are they role-playing? Consider this. If it is sufficient for running an optimal game algorithm to be roleplay, so long as the players know the thematic content of the mechanics they are using beforehand, then every round of Magic the Gathering is role-playing, as well as many other card games and board games. If this is sufficient, then I'd say Magic the Gathering is a role-playing game, along with, Monopoly, Guess Who, Battleship, chess, at which point the term role-playing game doesn't mean much because it can't differentiate between Monopoly and Morkborg. If running a game optimally is not sufficient to be role-played just because you know the thematic content beforehand, then that means it's possible to play a role-playing game without role-playing. I wonder how often that happens. All right, now the GM reveals that the roles that they're playing is that one player is a snake and they're trying to eat a puppy, and the player is absolutely horrified. The thematic value assigned to the game is now so strong that maybe they don't even want to win anymore, so they look at their objects and properties and they say, a snake can't use a revolver. I'll try property B instead, which is, I don't know, a persuade check or something. But it's mechanically suboptimal. Okay, for the first time since level 1 of our experiment, thematic content has affected the decision-making process. For the first time since level 1 of our thought experiment, the role that the player is playing has affected how they play the game. Even since level 2, the game has successfully produced a simulation and has successfully produced a story. The only sign since then that the player has had a mental process different from the level 1 complete abstract non-roleplay version of the game is that they have let something that is external to the mechanics affect how they play it. Could it be that allowing thematic content to affect your decision-making is required for roleplay, for even if you are aware of the thematic content but decline to let it affect your decision-making process, you are doing something identical to a game where there are no roles involved at all. Do games that take thematic content that would affect your decision-making had you not been a gamist, and make it a gamist mechanic, now allow you to ignore the thematic content and play the game algorithmically optimally in the same fashion as a game without thematic content? Without roles and without roleplay? Discuss. Even sometimes in life, we don't know what role we're fulfilling when we take actions, and it's only after the fact, sometimes long after the fact, that we are aware of the consequences or are aware of the role that we played in that situation. And it can be affecting. It can make us feel feelings. But it is a different experience than when we've got that role awareness. In a game where you interact with the mechanics, like we've been discovering, you run an algorithmic process and then you find after the fact what the thematic content of what you've done is. Do you tell the GM a bunch of math or show him a bunch of weird symbols on your dice and then maybe he narrates the results? Or maybe not, because you've been doing combat for an hour and you just want to get to the end. I mean, in this case, an algorithm might be able to run the mechanics more optimally than you can. It couldn't make decisions based on thematic information exterior to the mechanics that it is trained on, but you can. And that might just be what sets apart a game where it has thematic content, but the mechanics precede them, from a game where thematic decisions then precede the mechanical ones. Now, theme precede mechanics sounds quite a lot like a term that gets used in RPGs called fiction first, although fiction first is a lot more snappy. But there is a problem. Fiction first games have a reputation for not only putting thematic content temporally before mechanics, but also hierarchically above them. That is when the fiction, generally in the form of a story that the GM thinks would be most narratively satisfying, is at odds with the mechanics. You're encouraged to ignore the mechanics. Gamers will often point out that this leads to cliche and predictable stories. And, it demonizes fiction first as being less robust. If fiction first means fiction hierarchically above mechanics, then they might be right. But the idea that fiction first is the alternative to gamism is a false dichotomy. Theme preceding mechanics doesn't have to be hierarchical, it can just be temporal. That is, you can make decisions based on thematic content, then use mechanics that are just as robust and definite as with gamism, but the decision-making process is different. Whether mechanics are activated by thematic decisions, or whether thematic content is generated by mechanics, these are like two different game functions. They're games that do two different things, and mechanics can be written optimally to do one thing or the other. In fact, if you look at like editions of Dungeons & Dragons that have a skill system and combat powers, you'll see that more or less skills for outside combat are theme precedes, TP, and as soon as you roll initiative, it becomes mechanic precedes, MP. So it does them both in the one game, but it does them alternately. So I think TP and MP can be both just exactly as mechanically robust, but the mental processes used by each is different, and the way that the mechanics are written are different as well. I think when you design a mechanic, it's probably best to pick one of these functions and optimize your mechanic for doing that thing. Otherwise, you'll end up with, theme precede activations that fail to find appropriate mechanics, or you'll end up with MP mechanics that fail to generate sensible thematic content, or perhaps any thematic content. Games that alternate might be fine for people who like to stop doing one thing and do another thing for a while, but it's also possible that you might be alternating between a kind of game that you like and a kind of game you don't. And it's always possible that shoehorning one into the other is just going to do them both suboptimally. So should you take the kind of thematic content that affects value judgments and turn them into gamist mechanics so that this kind of content is robustly generated by gamist players, altering their decision process from thematic and judgmental to algorithmically optimal. In a role-playing game, I'd say you should do whatever facilitates roleplay, and that is going to be determined by whether you think roleplay occurs at level 5 or level 6 of our little experiment. All right, my name's Matt. This is the Tomb of Lime. Thanks very much for listening.